part of my garden is covered in brambles, and brambles are fucking awful to deal with. So I've been like shredding them bit by bit. So while you've been doing your calendar, I've been like cutting up bramble bushes, and I'm gradually getting there. You know, it's like 80% done now. But it's like I don't know. It's like about 40 square meters of bramble bush.
Wow.
Which is fucking huge, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is it like a weed or something, or?
Well, I mean, I count it as a weed, but you know, there's politics.
One man's
around
weed is
flowers and
other
weeds,
man's.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know.
And do you hack through it, or are you're just cutting?
I'm just cutting because, if you hack through it, it's kind of like it's not really, it's not that kind of plant that you can just hack through.
Oh, that sounds more fun, but
it's very spiky. Yeah. Yeah, that would be more fun. I agree. You know. But then you have to be careful because then you have to like dry it out. You have to dry it out. It's very it spreads very easy in the gardens. You have to dry it out. Then you have to either burn it or give it away. Give it to the waste area. But so you can't put it on the compost, you know, because it's too. It will just grow in there. It's just,
oh wow!
It's a total
I think we should welcome Adrian to the gardening podcast. Welcome to European gardening podcast, Adrian. So please go on. How do we get rid of bramble bushes?
Well, the thing is, you have to cut them down. Then you have to dig the fucking roots out, which are cunts as well, because you know they don't come out easily, and then they still grow back. Yeah, fucking nightmare. Basically, it's in terms of like a life's work. These bramble bushes are just fucking life's work.
So I can mark like 3 weeks of your life cutting bramble.
I'll be
bushes.
lucky if it's 3 weeks. You know, I think it would be more than that.
Well, it's a satisfying thing to do, I think. Then you have like a nice garden without bramble bushes.
Eventually, it will be quite nice, yeah. But I think I've still got another week or two left to fully clear it and then dig everything out. And oh my god, yeah. But it does feel a bit like progress is being made. You know, which is I don't know. Sometimes I feel to myself like, is destruction creativity? I guess that's really my philosophical thought. You know. Because I'm destroying a living thing, this bramble bush. And hopefully I'm going to create a little orchard there, so there will be more living things, that I can eat.
Well, you already killed one living thing.
Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently you're racist against bramble bushes.
Several dozen things. Several dozen living things,
It's whatever you deem to be worthy of living.
Racist against bramble bushes. That's a good way of putting it, yeah. I'm bramble bushist.
But Adrian, so anyway, I think I started recording anyway because this is pure gold. I think this is what our audience is craving for: how to get rid of bramble bushes from their gardens and raise infinite wisdom, removing the roots and whatnot. Welcome to Def and Adrian. I apologize for you have to go through all this shitty bramble bush discussion.
Thanks for having me.
So,
are we starting?
Yeah, we did already.
Fuck.
Why not? Why not?
Maybe it's a good idea to cut this out. Doesn't matter. Okay, carry on.
At this point, I think we are we are on brand for this kind of shit now. Like rambling on and not letting the guest talk at all, as you can see, Adrian.
Yeah.
Brambling on, exactly.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
This is brambling episode. So, Adrian, this is definitely I think this is 78 already. Wow. We're getting there goes my 78 weeks of life, working on Defen. But awesome to have you, Adrian. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, good to be here.
Nice. Yeah. So you are based in San Francisco or somewhere nearby?
Yeah, I'm in Sacramento, so about 2 hours away.
Is that the official capital of California?
Yeah, it is.
See? Bit of geography there, Vijay.
Well, it's not like I care about U.S. geography that much, but I mean, I'm not taking any exams on U.S. geography, but
yeah, not bad.
Probably you need to know it if you want to get US citizenship or something, right? If you are an immigrant, then you might need to know all the state capitals and whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. If you're here, they don't care if you know it or not.
Yeah.
Ah.
But isn't it one of these weird things though? Like, it's one of these like things like Canberra is the capital of Australia, which is just total bullshit, you know. But it's like an administrative thing, isn't it? Because obviously you've got Los Angeles and you've got San Francisco, fucking Sacramento. You know what the hell? Why the hell is Sacramento the Californian capital, Adrian? I want you to justify it now.
Well, I think it's because it was the end of the Transcontinental Railroad when it was first built. Right. So if you were taking the train across the country in the 1800s, you would end up at Sacramento.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
But it's kind of a running theme in different places, right? Like in Netherlands, Amsterdam is not the capital, but well, at least the seat of the government is in The Hague, and then Amsterdam is like commercial capital sort of thingy. In a lot of places, you know, maybe it's a historical reason usually.
Well, maybe it's a bit different in Sacramento because it sounds like, because like things like Canberra and Brasilia, they're kind of made up to kind of diffuse the power of these bigger cities, actually. Whereas it sounds like Sacramento was like, it was the capital, but then these other cities have grown to kind of, which we say they've kind of overshadowed it a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's one of those, what is it, Myanmar? They started building a completely new capital with, 18 lane roads and everything, that nobody lives there. So it's all like empty wasteland sort of thingy. So Brasilia is also like something that is just made up, or, well, not made up, but I mean.
Yeah, it was like architected.
Specifically,
it was planned.
Yeah. But hey, now we know, why Sacramento is the capital of.
Well, hopefully that's right. I'm not from here, so that could also just be made up.
you just made up a fact then and there. I think that's awesome.
All right. Okay.
So I think somebody should go to Wikipedia and then just edit and then just add this one.
How did you get to Sacramento then, Adrian, if you're not from there? I mean, don't say the railroad, It's like nobody in America goes on the railroad as far as I know.
Yeah, I took Amtrak and now I'm here. So
yeah, okay. It was the end of the line, so you just got off and I'm just
yeah, they make you get off, so it wasn't my fault. So I was in San Francisco for 10 years, and then during the pandemic, I moved to be closer to family, and I have a sister here in Sacramento, so that's kind of where I've ended up.
But is it similar to because you keep hearing San Francisco with all the tech companies there, right? I mean, is Sacramento kind of similar in terms of the tech scene, or is it a bit like less tech scene around Sacramento?
Yeah, there's definitely less of a tech scene, although there's there were a lot of people that moved to San Francisco, and then during the pandemic, it's like, okay, I've got a tiny apartment and I can't leave and everything's closed. It'd be nice to have a yard and some more space. So there's a lot of tech, I think, kind of moving to other cities like San Diego, Portland, Sacramento, Austin.
Okay. So what are you doing there? I mean, how did you, well, because this is Closure Podcast, obviously it's not Bramble Bush editing podcast, We'll get back to, the main topic of Bramble Bush soon enough.
Good.
Yes. So I know that's exactly what everybody is looking up to, when is the next episode coming on? How to I don't know what to do with my Bramble Bushes.
I'll send some photos as well, don't worry. Yeah.
So anyway, what is your journey? Yeah.
What's your journey to Sacramento? We've covered that one already.
Yeah, we covered that one. But we assume that, this is Closure Podcast, so we're going to focus on Closure journey, not the other stuff. So
good segue.
How did
He's a professional, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. This is 78th episode now, so I learned a thing or two. So tell us about your programming journey and how did you end up doing Closure in Sacramento?
Yeah, so I mean, I started programming kind of I think in middle school and high school, just programming on the TI-83 calculator, and then in high school I just wanted to. I thought it would be cool to learn how to program, and so like my brother had a friend who liked Java, so I just Googled Java, and they had these tutorials online, and you could just go through them, and that's kind of my first. That's kind of how I learned to program. Eventually, I went to school and uh, got a degree. Um, my degree was actually in computer engineering because I thought I wanted to do more hardware or electrical engineering. It
Oh.
wasn't until my last semester where I was like, oh, I like all the programming stuff more.
Mm.
But I didn't want to spend extra time at school. So um, I was in electrical engineering. I switched it to computer engineering just so I could take more computer science classes. But
Mm.
um, yeah, it's interesting. I actually value that part of my education just because a lot of computer science, you get a slightly different programming. I mean, at that time it was a lot of object oriented stuff, but getting a lot of the in computer engineering, you do a lot of like learning about the hardware, the CPU, lower level stuff, and that
Mm.
has been really valuable as I've kind of over the years. And then just programming a lot, you pick up a lot of the other computer sciencey concepts about how to organize and structure code.
Mm.
So
So Java was your first programming language then?
yeah,
Oh, interesting. Okay. But so how did you did after finishing your studies, did you work in Java professionally, or did you start learning some other things? And how did you end up in Clojure?
right. So right, I graduated. I went to work for a startup in San Francisco, and they were using Python.
Hmm.
Um, and then I went to another startup that was doing mobile games. So that was like Objective C, C++,
Mhm.
a little bit of Java. And while I was at that company, um, I wanted to learn Clojure because it was I'd read all the Paul Graham essays about Lisp.
Hmm.
And so I was just, I wanted to learn it because I wanted to learn more about Lisps and macros and the enlightenment that comes from that, which is
Mm.
kind of the selling point. But I mean, I wouldn't say that's the truth, but I'd say that's when I started to learn Clojure, and yeah, so I've
But
been using Clojure ever since. So that was around 2013.
oh wow, so because the did Lisp sound like, as you said, all the power that comes because you learn Lisp, sort of thing, and then that is the general vibe, right? Lisp is the ultimate, power weapon that you can have to build anything you like, sort of thingy. uh, Especially if you follow, Paul Graham's, uh, essays and everything, and his own Lisp implementation and everything. But it seems like you didn't believe in the message, or at least in the beginning you were okay, but now don't you feel like, well, it's okay, but it is not that, as it's too much marketing around Lisp.
Yeah, well, like I mean, one of the things that I think is unfortunate is I think you can't like I think I learned a lot from all of the languages I worked with. So I mean, I worked with Java. I did some stuff in PHP. I did stuff in Python, Objective C, and I feel like every language you learn that has kind of a different take on things, especially if they have really good documentation, like
Mm.
Objective C and Python.
Yeah.
You learn something from each of those, and I think it's the same thing with Lisp.
Mm.
Um, and I really like Lisp because it works well with the way that I like to program.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's I think all these different languages, if you go learn, Haskell or Rust or whatever, as long as they have really good documentation, a lot of them are really well thought out and you can learn from them. So I
Mm.
don't think Lisp is different in that regard.
Yeah. And why Clojure then? Because if you have seen, obviously you started with Java and JVM, but because you did Objective C, you did Python, that means you are exposed to non JVM languages anyway. Then what brought you back onto JVM and Clojure, and why did you stick with Clojure?
Yeah. So I mean, so I mean, I wanted to try it because I wanted to like, what's a macro? Like, what does it do? Why is it helpful? I mean, all the
Mm.
Paul Graham essays are like, if you don't have macros, you're like using a
Right.
blub language, and so that's what got me into it. But what kind of made me stay was that like I really like even when I was working in Python, I wanted to do REPL driven development,
Hmm.
and I wanted a
Mm.
functional style. And so I was doing a lot of this stuff in these other languages, but it wasn't necessarily well supported. And then when I got to Clojure, I'm like, oh, this like I really felt at home. It's like this is the way I want to work. I want to live code stuff. I want to do REPL driven development. I want to do I want to use pure functions. I want immutable data structures. Um, I want to. I remember in C++, you create a class to represent some data. And I was like, well, there's already a vector that lets you, like there's these built-in data types.
Yeah.
And in Python, it's actually pretty idiomatic to use the built-in data types like lists and maps. And in Clojure, that's also the case where you have all these like, you just represent data with data, and that you don't necessarily create new data types every time you want to talk about something new. And so basically Clojure, the way I wanted to program, I was kind of already going in that direction. And then Clojure just makes all of those things easier. It gives a lot of support, built-in support for it. A lot of the libraries I use are also will also help you program in that fashion. So it just, it worked well for me.
So Adrian, what sort of domains? You said you were working for a games company. Is that have you been generally involved in like games programming on the mobile, or what are the domains you've worked in?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't consider myself a games programmer, but that is a lot of my kind of professional experience. Is that so? When I was in college, I started making Facebook games, and that was the startup that I worked for. And then I came to San Francisco and worked more in Facebook games. And then while I was doing that, I picked up iPhone programming because it was like 2008, and there's a Steve Jobs presentation, and it's like, oh, this looks really fun. So I started learning iOS development, and then I had a friend that I used to work with start a new game company on iOS, and so I went to work there. And so those were mobile games, kind of like they're kind of like simulation style, where like SimCity type games where you have like a zoo and people visit your zoo, and then you buy animals, which gets more people to visit, and you kind of decorate and build a big zoo as an example.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Nice.
and that was all in Objective-C. And then when we started to do cross-platform games, it was in C++, or what we called Objective-C++, which is kind of a monster. But
Yeah. Is this based on Objective-C, or it's just your own? Because did you bring C++ concepts into Objective-C, or writing some parts in C++ and writing some parts in Objective-C and then combining them together?
well, we found this when we were using this Objective-C library for the game engine called Cocos 2D.
Yeah.
And then there's a C++ version called Cocos 2EX, but it's basically a one-to-one port of the Objective-C version. So for memory management, you still do a lot of the Objective-C stuff like retain, release, auto release, the reference counting.
Yeah. Arc.
And so it's like a lot of those. Since it was a one-to-one translation into C++, it had a lot of Objective-C idioms, but it was in C++.
Okay. And sorry, Ray, you were saying something.
I was just going to say
interrupted.
about the games engine, but you've kind of answered it, so it's no problem. Yeah.
So when you transition to Clojure, or when you move to Clojure work, are you still working on game side of it, or what is your Clojure experience so far? Is it on gaming? Is it on web development, or I don't know, mobile stuff with React Native, or everything?
What I started using it for was data processing. So we have these games online, and a lot of the game is powered by analytics. And so that was where it was like very directly applicable, was that, Clojure is really good at data processing. So, we collect all these data analytics, and then I can use Clojure to analyze the data and try to figure out how to look at metrics and how to update games. And then so I guess after around 2013, I started doing contracting. Yeah. So I used Clojure and ClojureScript for contracting, and and then I've also been doing open source work with Clojure. So I've started to. I mean, for contracting, you don't always get the choice. When I could choose Clojure, I would choose Clojure. When you can't, you use whatever language that they were using. So like some of the stuff that I've done in Clojure was I worked on this really cool project called Kamigama, which was was reimagining what like a digital comic would be. And it never quite gained enough traction to take off, but I thought, I mean, basically what they had was, it was like a one small interactive panel. And instead of having, most comics, you have multiple panels. But you would have one panel, and then to progress the story, you kind of interact with one panel. So it's like either a very like story-based game where there's not much like not much interaction, where you're just kind of progressing the story and making simple decisions in the story, is kind of one way to look at it.
So it's not a comic reading experience. It's more kind of an interactive gaming comic mixed thing.
Yeah, it's like an interactive story through like one frame that is, telling the story and is animated.
Yeah.
And you've got some choices where you can take the story.
Right. So yeah, some of them were more complex and some of them were more game-like, and some of them were more kind of just story-driven, where you kind of go into the next panel by interacting with different characters.
Oh, nice. But is it all done in Clojure script, or that one is completely Clojure stack?
Yeah, it was. So there's a web server, and there was a Clojure script to run in the web browser.
Okay. So what are the Clojure script things that you've been using? Because if you started in almost 2013, I'm not sure what was the situation back then, but I'm guessing you picked up the state of the art, so-called state of the art Clojure script stuff now, but with reframe and all those things. So how was your experience with Clojure script? Because if I see your experience, you're mostly working on Java or iOS, like kind of backend sort of work. So how did you feel picking up Clojure for the backend, and how do you feel picking Clojure script for the front end sort of work?
So for the for the backend, that was pretty familiar. You kind of like, I used Django and Python, and it's not like it's the same thing, but there's a lot of knowledge transfer between that and Composure and Ring.
Yeah.
But for Clojure script, I'd actually been doing. I mean, I did web development before, and at that time when I was doing web development, it was mostly in jQuery. But even at that time, I was like, I would basically have the data model, and then I would have like an update UI function, which would go and take the data model and apply every single time you call it update UI, it would apply every single change to the DOM. So when React came around, it was like, oh, it does that, but it's more efficient, and it has built-in support, and there's all these libraries, and it just does what I was doing, but better. And so for Clojure script, it was after learning kind of some of the, learning Clojure itself and getting over some of those hurdles, doing the web development felt pretty natural. And the other one, so at the time you were asking about the tech, there's I was using Ohm, not Ohm Next, but Ohm, the original
OG Ohm. Yeah.
Right. And Clojure Core Async. So there was and Core Async was actually a really great fit, because we're doing these comics which have a lot of asynchronous event handling, as well as like the way these were meant to be embedded. So you would have like you would have an iframe, and that would you needed to be able to like switch between comics. So since each of these comics were like JavaScript code, you wanted some sort of isolation between comics, so that like if you have a comic, you go through it and you load the next comic, you don't want any residual state to kind of, you don't want like timers and stuff to be continuing to run. So like you would have an iframe that would embed it, and then you'd load another iframe to run the comic. and then you'd have, and in some cases you would also have ads that would load asynchronously, and then you would also have asynchronous events coming in from user interaction from people like tapping on the comic itself.
Yeah.
So core async was a huge. I mean, like handling all this asynchronous stuff would have been a nightmare with just callbacks, but with core async, it lets you do a lot of um, really kind of cleanly express all these asynchronous pieces that needed to fit together.
Mm. So how did you become, how productive were you? I mean, because I would be just reading the comics, after building the first first thing, just wasting my time just going through the comics myself.
Oh
So,
yeah. Well, uh, so like, I mean, so at the time I was contracting and I was doing that part time. So like,
mm,
I was I was doing I was picking projects and I was specifically picking them so that I could basically work part time, and then
mm,
part time I wanted to work on this side project which I've been kind of like working on since kind of in the background kind of the whole time, which is like um, the kind of like the long term goal is I like working on programming for non programmers.
mhm,
And that has many manifestations, but the most like kind of the biggest portion of that is this UI library that I've been working on called Membrane.
yeah,
So, but yeah, so that most of the comic stuff was like 1 day a week for several years.
yeah,
And so like it was actually a really great way to work because you come in on Monday and there's like a list of stuff that you need to like get done that day, and you
and then you're
both know
done.
you have limited time, so like they do a really good job making sure you're working on the things that they actually care about and they're well specified.
Yeah,
And then you like go in there and you try to like crank it out, um, and you do it again the next week.
but that seems to be the biggest challenge in software development, right? Like identifying what exactly you need to work on, and then
Mm,
you know,
mm.
uh, essentially bringing the requirements, in a proper way. So, so you built the comic thing in Om. Did you
Right.
move to other technologies like Reframe, Reagent? Because Om is kind of now, well, um, not in the top three right now, I would say.
Right. So I never, yeah, I guess I never made it to, I mean, I've kind of as part of working on my own UI library, I've read about all the different options for building user interfaces. I have my cheat sheet over here. That's what I'm looking at.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
but I never seriously like had any serious projects in like Reframe or Hoplon or Reagent.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this because you said you are passionate about uh, coding for non-coding people. Is that right? Is that the right way to put it, or
Yeah, I don't know what the best term for it is, but
it's like
basically,
the
like,
no-code movement?
well, I mean, I definitely wouldn't call it no code just because it's like, basically, it's like if you anybody should be able to make a simple desktop, web, or mobile app is kind of the goal.
Mm,
And um, kind of saying no code is like, I mean, I don't know what the right marketing thing is, but like, so for example, I think Excel is a way people can like be really can get the computer to do what they want and be
Mm,
productive,
mm,
and it's really flexible and general. Um, and there's a very the learning curve is very gradual. So it's like if you spend a weekend learning Excel, like you can on Monday you can be more productive.
yeah,
So kind of more uh, I think we can make software like there's a lot of software development in my experience is just kind of like there's a lot of incidental stuff that has nothing to do with actually writing the software, and that we can remove a lot of it.
mm,
And so that's kind of what I'm passionate about trying to figure out is like how can we just like remove this 90% of stuff that just like has nothing to do with the problem.
yeah. So basically, unit tests, I mean, which don't nobody writes, and documentation, which nobody writes, and so we can remove all the unnecessary parts of software. Like who needs documentation anyway? Um, but yeah, that's kind of a challenging domain, right? I mean, there is. I think there have been like multiple efforts are still ongoing to bring um, Yeah, as you said, I think saying it code or no code doesn't make any sense. It's more about solving your problem using software that you built quickly without having this whole I need a developer to do this for me sort of situation. So
Right.
But maybe it's a better. Maybe the question then is like, what with Excel, you kind of like you're thinking about, I mean, I guess with Excel, a lot of people are thinking about accounting or about planning or something like that. Those kind of like business type domains. I mean, you can write recipes in there, you can do all kinds of shit in Excel. But essentially, I mean, I would say essentially it's planning and numbers, accounting. I know Excel's got more capabilities than that, but those are the essential domains. So what is it with this? If you're going to do like an equivalent for Excel, you have to pick another domain which is approachable or which is well known. So is that the idea that you kind of have some gaming kind of system or some sort of minimal gaming system that you're addressing with this particular tool?
Right. So I mean, there's kind of like a long term plan, but so I think Excel, what it's really good at is that you can um, I mean, I think Excel. I mean, if you look at kind of technologies that people can get up to speed with and build without a lot of experience, really interesting stuff. Um, you like look at Excel. It's like mutable data, data flow, pure functions. Um, Excel has all of these things, so it's like, and these are really good for kind of, and it's also incremental. So it's like a half. If your Excel spreadsheet is like half working, it actually you get like half the value compared to like a C program. If you're missing a semicolon, it doesn't do anything.
Mm.
Even if
Immediate
it's like
feedback as well is the killer. Yeah.
right. So and it yeah, and so you can construct these pure. You can have these pure data flows. One thing that I think is missing is that you can't. There's no good way that I know of to do abstraction, which I think is easy to add. Um, Basically you just have you can have your input cells as like the function parameters, and then you have one output cell, and then you can have as much stuff in between, and you can create a function from that. And but anyway, like I think you can use Excel to create pure functions. And then one of the big missing pieces of Excel, well, I mean, from a general perspective, is that there's no side effects. There's no like it doesn't interact with the world, so you can't send um, so like well, they have specific integrations with like
yeah, yeah.
email and databases, and but I think you can. It's not good at like this side effect stuff, and so I think you want. So I think what you want is another tool that helps you with the kind of workflow composition piece that helps you deal with the side effects. Like an example of that is like if this and that or Zapier, where you're kind of like you have uh, inputs to the system. You have data coming in like emails and text messages and user input and stuff from the
Mm.
network, and then you uh, transform that with pure functions, and then you have outputs like sending emails, text messages, writing stuff to the database, um, displaying stuff on screen. Uh, and so I think if you combine those two, you can basically make any program.
Hmm. So how did you from this idea of making easy to solve your problems using software that you can build yourself, which is I think quote unquote no code or whatever that is that people are calling these days. um, so is this the genesis for membrane? Is this the one that you started working on um, towards this goal, and then maybe you can explain how membrane came to be.
Right. So um, basically, what I like the app that I was doing these demos, and I was doing it in with ClojureScript, and I felt like, I mean, this thing that had been kind of bugging me for a long time is that I feel like building user interfaces is way more difficult than it has to be, and then there's all this incidental complexity, and especially UI code has this like it's slow and brittle, and it's slow to build, and it's brittle, and that it's not composable, and it's like if you target web and then you try to like take that to mobile, a lot of times you're using completely different tools, completely different stack, and there's all these issues with just like um, composition and flexibility and reuse. Um, and so, and the other part is I was trying to kind of build these like you're writing programs that are dynamic, and it was just like um, it was just a real challenge to try to build that using the UI libraries that were available. And like so for the demos I was doing the thing where you kind of like you write your front end enclosure script, and then if you want to like talk to the file system, the database, send do networking, you would have to do that on the JVM, or I was doing that on the JVM. And so you have this huge problem where you have to like send all the data back and forth across the network, and you have to serialize everything, and it's and that just adds a lot of complexity on top of already a hard problem.
Yeah.
So I was really so Membrane is my attempt at like building the UI library that tries to simplify building user interfaces.
So the idea with Membrane is that you can do all of this traditional server-side stuff in the client device.
Well,
no network chatting.
Well, with Membrane, it's really just trying to simplify user interface development, and it's kind of trying to get back to like what is a user interface, even just trying to answer that question.
Okay.
And kind of go first principles. So I mean, what I started with was like, okay, I'm gonna get OpenGL, and I'm gonna have Clojure, like, and then I'm gonna try to build everything with just data and pure functions. What's that look like? And that's kind of where I started. And since then, I've tried to like actually build out a lot of the concepts for like, okay, what is a user interface? How do you build stuff with just data and pure functions? And kind of since I've been doing that for a while, it's a lot easier to look back on like these different options like Hoplon and Fulcro and Helix and Reframe and Reagent and say like, okay, here's why I feel like those aren't simple enough. Like they're not using data, they don't have pure functions. They the graphics and event models aren't pure and functional. So,
so how do you? So if I'm trying to understand what Membrane is, so it's essentially a way to declare or create UIs, and then the actual UI code is platform specific. Is that a way to understand it? So I can specify I'd like to have a window with a button, blah blah blah, and then if I execute it for web, I see a different thing. If I see I can execute the same code to have the same UI across different platforms. Is that a way to understand it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like going back to kind of like what's the definite like what is a user interface?
Yeah.
It's basically what it kind of boils down to for most user interfaces is you have graphics, which is like you have a which displays the state of a program, and you have events, which mouse and keyboard from the user that gets interpreted by the user interface. And so the goal of the user interface is to display the state of the program, which I think we're pretty good at. And then the user interface itself should just, all it is a pure function of raw events like mouse and keyboard to user intention. So it's like you have a mouse click at 0.4455, and the intent is to add a new to-do to your to-do list. And so you have a pure function from the state of the program to the graphics should look like, and then a pure function from the raw events to the user intents.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if you define your user interface like that, it's just data, and you can basically Membrane has backends for all these different platforms, and platforms provide, graphics and raw events. So it's like, Java 2D has graphics and events and event handling. There's you can run the same user interface of the terminal. You can do it with WebGL. You can run on the iPhone now. So basically any platform that has raw events and like 2D graphics, Membrane can, you can write a backend so that your user interface will run on those backends.
So do you need to do the translation yourself, or is it something you can just plug in Membrane and then say generate the UI for, let's say, Mac OS, for example? How does it work in practice? So if I want to start, let's say I want to build, let's forget about the backend. I just want to build it, as you said, like a to-do list, like a cross-platform one using Membrane. So how would the developer experience be compared to normal thing? Like I'm going to build Swift UI. I'm going to build on Android using, I don't know, Kotlin, whatever Android has, XML shit. And then, for web, I'm going to draw my HTML, DOM, whatever. So how is the experience different? Like why would I pick Membrane that is going to solve this pain of building cross-platform stuff?
So for the so it looks, in some ways it looks kind of similar to what you're familiar with. One of the big differences is that the primitives that you work with are like you have shapes like squares and rectangles, and you have and text and images and kind of like ways to draw those. So they're basically just 2D primitives.
Yeah.
And then you also, with events, one of the big differences is that the event handling in Membrane is it's based on return value. So like for most stuff, it's like on click. What happens in Reframe or all of most similar libraries is that you will dispatch an event.
Yeah.
So it's like you receive the event and then immediately you start firing off side effects. Whereas in Membrane, you just return what the intent should be based off of the input.
Okay.
And since they're functions, you can kind of compose them. So it's like you can build complicated interfaces around simpler, smaller interfaces. And the other thing that you can do is like let's say you have a you have a button, and you tap on it and it's supposed to like increment a counter. In like Reframe, it's like if you wanted to say which counter that was supposed to increment, you have to like pass in a callback because it's all based off side effects, or you have to receive a callback. With Membrane, you can just modify the function itself, the return value of the event function. So basically, you have the button, and then you just modify its event function to return which counter. So it's a little bit hard to kind of explain without a code example, but basically, it's not based, and a lot of these other ones, it's based off side effects, whereas in Membrane, it's based off return values and kind of just functional composition.
I'm thinking about like Reframe now. What you do with Reframe is you just say what the keyword is, and that becomes a function dispatch on that particular event function. So it's not like you don't pass a function; you just say this is the keyword that I'm going to dispatch, and that results eventually in the graph calling that function. But it sounds similar to what you're talking about in some ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is some like and a lot of times it looks very similar.
Right.
But when you're trying to build tools around it or do generic processing or do testing, that's when it really starts to matter more. So like there's a lot of like if you're just using data and pure functions, you don't need a UI testing library. You just use a regular testing library. And I think a lot of the so like one example that I like to reference is that for Reframe, you can't have multiple applications running at the same time.
Right.
And so if you kind of and that's because all these things are side effect based. So it's like the event happens, the event gets dispatched, and it's like everything's already in motion, it's all connected. It's too late to kind of like go back and add some context that says like, okay, this event should be dispatched to this particular application instance. Whereas in membrane, you just modify the event function to be like, okay, all the events under this part of the tree, now they have this this context that says which application it should go to.
Hmm. So how is the, because I'm trying to understand, how do you compare this with, um, no, maybe better better question for me to understand this better is like, so the rendering is delegated to the platform itself. So you don't have any rendering code in Membrane. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a separate piece that you kind of like. So basically, you build your application and you say like, so you might say like, I have a label,
Yeah.
and next to that is a rectangle with rounded corners,
Mhm.
and then next to that there's like um, an image,
Mhm.
and so all of these things are it's just data. It's just like there
Mm.
are records for each of those different types: the image, the label, and the shape.
Yeah.
Um, and each platform provides its own draw function. So there's like, so it you you can basically just like say take this data structure, and
Mhm.
if you want to draw it using Java 2D, you just call the Java 2D draw function with that data. And if you want to draw it using WebGL, you just call the WebGL draw function with that data.
Yeah.
And there's now backends for like you can just draw stuff in terminal.
Mhm.
You can, fortunately, there's like one graphics library called Skia that
Yeah.
runs on several different platforms, so that just um, implementing that one library kind of lets you run on several different platforms.
Is Kia the
Um,
thing that Nikita is building?
And it's from IntelliJ Skia, but I think Nikki is
Yeah,
part of it.
yeah. I think
right. So Skia is
he's the lead. Yeah.
Skia is the graphics library that is used by Chrome and Android, and
Mhm.
Skija is like Skija
Yeah.
is Nikki's. He wrote Java bindings for it,
Ah, okay.
so it's a and you can also use from Clojure.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then he's going to do a Clojure version of it, I think, first part of this Clojurists Together thing, or
Hmm.
he's thinking about it. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
it looked like he's interested in building a UI framework on top of it, which sounds
Mm.
really, really cool.
Yeah. So how does it compare with, I'm sure you might have looked into things like Flutter, or this whole, because there has been a lot of efforts to unifying, having a common framework that you can use to build, um, kind of a, same experience, or using the same code base but able to build UIs for any platform we like, right? I mean, one of the,
React is an obvious example as well,
yeah,
actually. I mean, React is
exactly,
meant
using
to be
React
like
Native.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
using React Native.
React and React Native, and
Yeah. So how do you see what is your opinion on these kind of things? Because it seems like, at some point people have given up on native components, and then we have this monstrosities of fucking Electron applications everywhere,
Mm.
not respecting any of the platforms behavior at all. And then on the other hand, things like Flutter and those things are coming up. So how do you see these things evolving, and where do you put Membrane in this spectrum?
Yeah, so Membrane probably does too many things, but I mean, like there's the state management, which
Hmm.
like is like similar, or tries to solve a similar problem to like Relay or Reframe or um, Reagent or Fulcro. And then there's the kind of like the raw graphics and events part.
Hmm.
Um, and like one thing that I would say is different from like Flutter is that if you look at a lot of these, there's a lot of functional UI libraries, and most of them focus on state, which is a, where a lot of functional programming tends to really shine. But
Yeah.
they're all built on top of like these object oriented um, yeah, they're all built on top of this like object-oriented stuff. So like for reframe, it's built on top of the DOM, which is this like highly object-oriented both graphics model and a highly object-oriented event model, which is all
Mm.
based off side effects. And then if you look at like Flutter and React Native, they're built on top of UIKit or Android stuff or Qt or GTK. All of this, all of the state management libraries are just built on top of this object-oriented stuff. And a lot of the issues that I think a lot of the issues that come from, like UI programming, I think that we're running into today and kind of like starting to bump into as we build more complex apps comes from the object-oriented stuff underneath.
Mm.
Do you think it's because? Okay, well, maybe you should just tell us why you think that is. Where are we hitting the limits of these like or concepts? Because instinctively I want to agree with you, but I'd like you to kind of reason it out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I was just so today is, I think it's the 10th anniversary of Simple Made Easy, the Chicky talk.
Yeah.
And basically, I mean, I think it's like it kind of just goes back to those things where you want to build applications out of dramatically simpler stuff. And what I think you can kind of see where you're bumping into those issues with like, especially with React, where it's like you can't, like if you have a testing library, you kind of almost need a React testing library.
Sure.
You can't just use any testing library. I mean, one of the benefits you get from most Clojure code is that like if you have a library that works with data, you can reuse it anywhere. So you can reuse Spec for all sorts of stuff. You can reuse Meander and Spectre and all these data processing libraries in all sorts of different fields. Whereas with UI stuff, you tend to have like, okay, I have reagent, and then to make that easier, I have reframe in it. And on top of that, you have maybe some other component library. And then if you have a database, it's like a UI database. And if you do event handling, it's UI handling. And so it's like all this stuff gets coupled together.
It's sort of specialized by the context rather than by the problem.
Right. And it's just like, and it's hard to kind of do generic stuff. And like another example is, so if you write a reframe component and you want to reuse that same component in Fulcro, that's like nonsense. Like, people like that just, as far as I know, that just doesn't happen. So even though they're both built on top of React, like why can't you reuse this? Like, why can't I just take a UI component from this other thing and reuse it? With Membrane, you can actually every Membrane component, like there's so like I would say that the reframe components kind of like complete the state management with like the graphics and events. And so for each of like CLJFX and reframe and Fulcro, you can take a Membrane component and like convert it. With one function, you can convert any Membrane component into a Fulcro component. And there's another function that will convert any Membrane component into a reframe component. And I think that's kind of what we want, is like you define a UI component, and since it's a pure function, you just like reuse it. So it's like somebody wrote a date picker and I want to use it. I don't really care. Like I think it's a big problem that like, oh, they wrote it in reframe and now I can't use it. I have to like write my own now.
Yeah.
So one of the things, I mean, it's a great point, because these things like date pickers are very generic, but I think these React hooks are meant to try and solve that. So you can start to import like React components into the ClojureScript world. Is it similar in some ways, the Membrane approach to? Cause, I mean, you could argue that hooks are a kind of like functional version of component definitions.
Well, I mean, I think I would not consider. I think React hooks are probably the wrong direction, and the reason for that is I mean, basically, you want to build components out of data and pure functions.
Mhm.
And fundamentally, like subscriptions and React hooks are based off of side effects. Like, I was I was watching a talk about a brand new, or it's a relatively new um, UI framework, and they're like, oh yeah, it's a function, but you shouldn't call it. Like, you don't call it. You pass it to React, and eventually somebody else calls it.
Hmm.
And
Right.
like, it's a function.
Okay.
It's like, what else are you going to do with it? So
Mm.
every every membrane component is just a pure function. So you can call it with whatever data you want. You don't have to set up any context, and you get back data, which is just like um, which is basically just the event function and the graphics function. So um, you get back a view, which you can write to disk, you can draw it in a number of ways. You can draw it to an image, you can draw it to um, any of the other graphics contexts that are available, and then you can also um, immediately say like, okay, what's going to happen, or you can ask for what are the intents if I click at mouse position 44.
Hmm.
So I create a component, I pass it in the data and it returns a view, and I can say like, okay, I can basically just click everywhere and see what happens at each mouse point, or I can type in every key stroke and get back all of the events or all the intents that would be returned um, um, if the user were to be typing or clicking
Yeah.
on that component.
So you you will build, or the idea is that when you're using membrane, you declare the UI in membrane as components, and then you can essentially translate it into any of the frameworks that I'm using or any of the platforms that I'm using, right? I can think of it like, okay, now I want to build a reframe application, but I can just reuse all the membrane components that I have. Then I just bring them in, and then build the thing. So how um, how complex it is to build complex UIs, or is it simple? Is it easy? So how does it work in terms of building like full frame, full fledged web application or a desktop application with lots of buttons and whatnot and everything that you see usually.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been focusing mostly on desktop just
Hmm.
because that's kind of the problem space I'm interested in. And I mean, I know I've been kind of like beating up on Reframe and Reagent and Fulcro, but they're actually like, if you want to build a web application, they do make it really easy, and they are really good at what they do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, but so I've been so like the biggest application that I'm working on and is a work in progress is basically I just want to be able to drag and drop UI components. Basically, I want interface builder meets Figma. You
Hmm.
can kind of um, direct manipulation, uh, drag and drop components, and kind of quickly throw together a user interface. Um, and Yeah, that was what I was trying to originally build, and decided that it was really difficult to build using kind of um, the tools that were available for
Yeah.
building user interfaces.
So in the journey of, because this is all obviously started based on your idea of making it easy to build software without too much effort, and then that can run anywhere. So the, I would consider this like a first step, right? I mean, because building the UI, I think we have enough tools to simulate at least building a complex UI, how it is going to look like in different platforms, for example. But there is still part of like the business logic part, and quote unquote business logic, or what should happen, and as you pointed out, like the whole side effecty thing, like where am I going to store the data, for example, and where I'm going to read the data from. So how is your vision uh, from membrane to that point? How do you want to take it to that level? Is the membrane first step, or is membrane uh, kind of a critical part of that one?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like kind of coding for non-coders is a big problem, and the way you solve big problems is you break it up into smaller problems. And there's a lot of like one of the smaller problems I think is just like I wanted to build I want to be like if you're actually making a dynamic user interface in itself, then like um, you yeah you want to build like you don't know what people are going to build, so it needs to be dynamic. And I was having trouble building those user interfaces with the tools that were available.
Hmm.
And I want to basically the formula in my mind is you have like something like Excel for building for data processing, creating pure functions, and then you have something like well, I haven't mentioned something like I don't know if you've played the game Factorio,
No.
I don't know it. No.
Okay.
but basically something that helps you build the side effect part. Like you can build workflows, kind of like Zapier or if this and that with a little bit more flexibility
Yeah.
for the side effects.
Hmm.
And then if you can also build a user interface on top of that, you can that's kind of like you can kind of build anything from those parts. And also the two pieces like the Excel like portion and the Factorio like portion, um, I need to build those user interfaces. So
Hmm.
having a tool that makes it easier to build those user interfaces is also um, part of solving the problem.
Yeah. Why did you pick Clojure for this? Given that you have experience with so many other languages, why Clojure?
Yeah, I mean, I think Clojure is actually, um, Clojure. I mean, one of the things from Simple Made Easy is that like um, we can build programs using simpler stuff, and people have been building databases and data processing, and um, they've there's all these different things that all these different programs and different types of programs and all sorts of different domains and banking software that Clojure has been able to build things using simpler underlying pieces. um, I don't see why we can't do that for user interfaces.
Hmm.
And I've really gotten a lot of benefits from using Clojure because it supports, especially for building user interfaces, having the live, the REPL-driven development with live coding is really useful. And just by using, the just by using the built-in Clojure stuff, like you have event processing, but if you want to add more events, Clojure makes it easy to have an open data model. And you have you represent your views as data, and it's like, okay, it makes it easy to be like, okay, I want it to run on the iPhone or in terminal or on desktop or in WebGL. And so and it also makes immutable data and pure functions idiomatic. So it's like um, is a long-term project, being able to like write some code that is really really stable
Hmm.
has been really helpful. That you can, I write this part of the code and um, I can reuse it later, and it's I can come back, like 1 or 2 years later, it kind of still just works. And so
yeah, that's a really
yeah,
good. That's a really great point, actually. Yeah. One of the things, just to clear up though, so you're saying that it kind of like skated past me a little bit, but what you're saying is we should give up on the DOM. Is that right? We should stop using the DOM and we should just use other things to build UIs.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one caveat is that like if you're targeting the web, you need to spit out you probably need to spit out HTML stuff, but we should absolutely not be creating user interfaces like with those primitives. I've been doing web development for a long time, and like I still don't feel like I know what a div is. I just know that they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's like a div. Yeah, it's just something I put in there so I can call my reframe app.
Right.
Or just style it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But,
if you look at
but I agree with you. I mean, it always seems very frustrating to me to have these like things like in the DOM rather than. I think people have been moving a little bit more recently, even the bigger companies, towards kind canvas and things like this because they can't get the efficiencies from the DOM. And it always felt a little bit like, I mean, people say this, people said it a long time, that the DOM was not made for applications, it was made for text. It's called the document object model, not the application object model. And it's got object model in it as well, which is your point. So so we should have like an application, maybe it's a functional model, FM, rather than like document object model. Maybe, like you say, you can have documents around the side of it or to the left of it, or using hypertext. It's fine. You can link to things. You're not going to give up on those things because they're nice and simple. But what you're saying is we should use the simpler parts of the web stack rather than this DOM stuff.
Right. So, I mean, I think there's already projects that do this today, like React Native Web and React Primitives. But basically, just if you look at design tools, I don't think I've ever seen, I mean, I'm not a designer, so maybe they exist, but I've never seen a div tool. What you see is like, you have shapes, you have text, you have images, you have like gradients and stuff, but there's no div. And so what we should do is be defining our user interfaces in terms of these primitives like shapes, text, images, and but it's okay to the browser requires like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but a lot of people are moving, like for JavaScript, for example, like people aren't writing the JavaScript directly. They're either minifying it if they're writing JavaScript, or they're using TypeScript or ClojureScript, and it's spitting out, more performant, smaller payloads, versions of JavaScript that do the same thing. And we can do that with our graphics too. So you can like write text and images and shapes, and you can build a compiler that will like spit out HTML that's smaller payloads, better performance, and is also not tied to like the web platform.
And why did you pick WebGL though? Because I was wondering, because if you're drawing it in a browser, technically you can use SVG or that because if it is just shapes and images anyway, then why WebGL? Why not SVG, or is it just another backend?
Yeah, it's just another backend. So there's a backend that will spit out, or that will draw to open WebGL context.
Yeah.
But there's also another backend that uses there's a library called VDOM, which is just the virtual DOM part of it's kind of like just the virtual DOM part of React. It doesn't have any of the state management stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's another backend that was like actually spit out HTML virtual DOM, which VDOM will reconcile with the underlying DOM.
Oh, okay.
And if you wanted to build a SVG backend, you can just all you need to do is basically provide implementations for like, here's how you draw a shape, here's how you draw an image, here's how you do text.
Oh, okay.
Isn't there's another standard coming on apart from WebGL, isn't there? Like a successor to WebGL, and I can't remember its name right now. Maybe you know it, Adrian.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
It's because WebGL is like one of these things which is, not performing very well, and it doesn't adapt very well to the hardware. So
is it the web GPU?
Web GPU, that's it. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just Googled for it.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a live podcast, so
All right.
we have access to the information.
Yeah.
It seems to be the web GPU thingy. Okay. That sounds like a really weird name for this shit. What is web GPU? Anywho, so, well, obviously, I think there is a biggest question that I'm interested in. So, which editor do you use? Do you use Emacs or some other shit?
Yeah, I use Emacs.
Fuck.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, look, all these awesome ideas. I mean, I was thinking, okay, I've been talking to this person for 1 hour already, and this seems to be like a really good ideas. He must be an Emacs person. It's kind of a given. Awesome.
But are you in love with it, though, Adrian? Are you in love with it, or do you want to render it in a different way?
Yeah, I've been I want to be able to embed a text editor, and I've been trying really hard to figure out how to embed Emacs so I can just use it
Yeah.
everywhere.
So all I need to do is just draw a shape in membrane and then just embed Emacs into that one, and then that becomes like a next generation web, next generation editor.
Yeah.
Awesome. So there is a membrane.el eventually. There will be, because I think Emacs has this weird UX or UI components, right? You can define a button and all the stuff, the configuration and everything, and so I'm guessing somebody needs to build a backend for membrane or the interpretation for membrane, so I can write the same UI and then I'm going to render it inside Emacs.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be able to just Emacs, unfortunately, I think is very tied to the terminal. I'd love to just have it spit out kind of the what should be displayed so that you can just kind of like run it anywhere, but haven't quite figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is it's a piece of shit, but okay. That's just my rough translation.
So
okay.
So a couple of
Moving on.
Yeah. So I mean, we already established Emacs. Is the reason why you came up with this. Better ideas and everything. It's not just
Exactly.
because you're working. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea.
I've got to say, these do sound like really good ideas, and it's very fundamental, and yeah, I like it a lot. I think it's. So, what stage are you kind of at in terms of this tooling, Adrian? Where you kind of like still in the sort of build out phase of the fundamental framework, then you'll eventually get to these other pieces, or are you getting close to prime time, or in other words, can we start picking up and working with it now, or are you still kind of like just working through some of the rough edges or fundamental concepts even? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick it up and start. So I think for desktop and for terminal UIs, since there's not a lot of good alternatives, I mean, CLJFX is also pretty good. But if you want to build desktop apps, there's nothing quite like Reframe and Fulcro and Helix and some of the other options on the web.
Oh, so you mean web, yeah.
Yeah, so the web has like really great options if you're writing ClojureScript.
Yeah.
And so it's not really going to compete there. It's not something that I'm deliberately not focusing on the web because there are such good options already existing. But for desktop and terminal UIs, you can kind of pick it up, and I think it is a really good option. I think just building another UI library is not. I don't think that's a good reason to. I mean, I think there is a lot of cool stuff about Membrane, and that you can, it can access all these different platforms, and that, there's the functional event stuff and the data-driven views. But like, I don't think that's quite enough to like pick up this kind of weird UI library. And so there's still some like, so I'm still working on the features that would make it kind of interesting for their, picking up this weird new UI library. And I think the next step is really this basically drag and drop UI builder, which I think I don't know if you've seen Brett Victor's drawing dynamic visualizations. So it's meant to be kind of one of these dark manipulation things where it's like you can build really dynamic stuff, and that's which is also one of the reasons I think Clojure excels here, is because like you can just call a val. So basically, you draw all the UI components, and then to get the value, you just eval the, like basically you're kind of writing code through direct manipulation, and then you eval the code that you produced via direct manipulation. And so I think that's kind of like the next big step where it's actually really interesting, where it would actually be really interesting for people to start using, is like, okay, I want to build like an internal tool. It's going to have some text boxes and some buttons and some checkboxes, and I can just like drag everything in place. And then I have, and that's how I build the graphical part of the UI. And then I have the business logic somewhere else.
So right now, if I use membrane, I'll mostly use it for defining the UI, and then the business logic or whatever the domain related things, I'll just build it in one of the frameworks that I'm using, or depending on the platform that I choose, I just build it there, right?
Right. So like I do have so there are the different pieces of membrane, and so the state management is separate from the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do have bindings for reframe and fulcro, in addition to kind of a state management library that membrane provides. Um, and I mean the intentionally that part of the library is kind of minimal because everything's just data and pure function. So rather than using a UI specific state management library, you just use state management. Like you just use regular closure code,
Yeah.
because it's just data and functions. So it's like you don't need a UI specific one. You may need some like helper functions, but you can basically, you know, you don't have to use a UI specific one. If you have another state management library that you're using for something else, you can use it here too, because it's all, it's just all data.
Okay.
So the other thing that's like that you've been working on, and we were talking about this on the apropos show, was the GraalVM thing with Borgdude, Michael Borkent. Do you just want to quickly like give a kind of like review of that for the people who didn't see it on apropos? The two or three people. I'm sure most of our audience have seen that one, but you never know. There could be some heathens that are only deafened.
Yeah, that'll be me. So
okay.
Yeah. So there's a project called GraalVM, and it has a tool called Native Image, and what that does is you can take JVM bytecode and you can compile it to assembly for multiple platforms. And since Clojure runs on the JVM and spits out bytecode, you can compile Clojure to assembly for these different platforms. And one of the platforms that you can target is iOS. So
I think that's fairly recent, though, isn't it? I think that was the interesting part, that's a fairly recent target, if I'm not wrong.
It's kind of hard to say because they like the only way to get access to the information is you have to really be following closely this GraalVM project.
Right.
And there's all these different configuration parameters that you need, and like getting access to like, it's hard to tell how new it is versus like how much like, part of it has just been like, Mikhail Borkdude has done a bunch of work with GraalVM to make Clojure work. And the Clojure core team has actually supported that and added new features to Clojure to make that easier. And with you like if you're going to do a UI library and work with something that runs on iOS, you need access to the native platforms. You need to really like talk to the file system and graphics. And Chris Nurenberger has a library called dtype next that makes that part easier. So there's the documentation, there's the community information, there's the like the grunge work of like I don't know what changes. So with GraalVM, you can't have there's no reflection, or you need configuration, and so the core Clojure team has like done extra work to make that work better under GraalVM compilation. So there's a bunch of little pieces that are all.
I thought reflection did work. It was just the generation of classes that didn't work. So you can't eval, but you can reflect.
You can reflect, but it requires extra configuration.
Right.
And in general, you kind of just want to avoid that. So
sure.
For the most part, you just want to type into everything. But yeah, I can't remember what was exactly added to. It was like Clojure. There's some update that made that better.
I seem to remember it as well, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Some 1.10 release, 110.2 or 110.3. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So the big news anyway is that you can now run Clojure, not just ClojureScript, on the iPhone.
Right. And you build a native application and it's also using Psi. You can have a REPL, so you can kind of live code your iOS app. And there's also this hasn't been we haven't done the work on the Clojure side, but the GraalVM can also target Android. So it should be possible to do all the same, to have the same steps where you can also build Android apps. But there's still some work to be done there.
I mean, in theory, that should be easier because essentially, that is it's a more proximate target to the JVM. In theory.
Yeah, in theory.
You leave that one as an exercise to the readers because it's so trivial, It's the iOS one, which is exciting because it's like, whoa.
But Membrane also uses this technology, right? I mean, the using GraalVM native image to render app in iOS thingy, or is it a different backend?
So you can build. It compiles to assembly, but you still need the UI. And Membrane now has an iOS backend. So it's like it's kind of fun. Like I had the To-Do MVC that I used to test, and the same one that runs on desktop, you can just run on the mobile app. It's not quite as good because it's like the checkboxes are really tiny, but like, you can still, it's the same UI, and all you need to do is be able to draw shapes, text, and images, and forward tap events, and it's like, okay, Membrane's ready to go.
Yeah.
One of the things that you did with when you were on the Apropos, you did some live coding where you had the game of life up on the phone, and then you could like dynamically change the color of the skaters. What are they called?
The cells?
The things which go across the are they not called?
Gliders.
The gliders, not the skaters. The gliders. Yeah. Which is really a great demo, I think, of how you can have this live coding experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sold on live coding. I feel like that's how I want to program. I've tried to I like learning new languages, and now it's hard because a lot of languages don't have good REPL support. So it's like I want to try like Go or Haskell or Rust, but it's like, as soon as I start programming and I don't have the REPL, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, you have to wait 5 minutes before you get an answer about whether it's working or not.
Yeah.
So, just another thing. Sorry, VJ. Just one more thing on this is that, if I'm not wrong, the sort of breaking news as well, not for this show, but I noticed that Mikhail was talking about it recently, was that as part of this work of using like dtype next and stuff like this, you're also trying to look at building like foreign function interface to C libraries from Clojure as well. So maybe we could talk about that for a few minutes as well.
Yeah. So like what I think is really interesting, there's a ton of really good C libraries that are available. And so I've kind of started wrapping some of them. Like so on desktop I use GLFW to create the windows. I use Skia, which has a C, well, it's a C++, but you can call it from C to do the graphics. I have a wrapper library for Chromium embedded framework, so you can kind of programmatically control Chrome. And a lot of these C libraries they actually have fairly functional interfaces. Like sometimes there's Java libraries that will wrap these C libraries, but most of the time they just kind of make it worse. And so if you can just call the C functions, it's often better than using the Java library that wraps it. And so you can do that today already with dtype next, but the new stuff that I think you were mentioning is that if you can do that, if you can dynamically load shared libraries from Babashka, it gives you access to like, basically you can have this small binary for Babashka, and then you can access like a bunch of C libraries, and you can also compile Java or Clojure libraries and use those dynamically and ship those separately from Babashka itself.
Mm.
And so one of the kind of selfish goals for that is I think it'd be really cool if you could script user interfaces with Babashka and Membrane.
Mm.
So if you can dynamically load Membrane and then just you could just create make it easy to script a user interface that like shows a little window, and then you can like hit a button that says profile and it'll show these like flame graphs of whatever you're doing.
Mm.
Or if you wanted to run tests and you wanted a better user interface than like the terminal UI, you can just like write a Babashka script that shows you all your tests and then like gives you a little user interface to use that more
Nice.
efficiently.
Mm. Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So I think I just have like I think 2 questions. To I think we are almost 1.5 hour. Nice. I think it's always a good thing when we can't keep track of time. That means it's stuff is so good that we're now fully immersed into the thing. So there are a couple of things. One is that so how can people contribute to Membrane? And the second one is I see that the amount of C code in Membrane is more than Clojure code. So what is happening there? Is it really a Clojure project or is it a C project? And what is C doing there, or C++?
Yeah, I think it is a Clojure project, and I think the reason for that is that the Clojure code does a lot more per line than C code. So even though Clojure is doing all of the work, C takes up a similar amount of code, even though it's not doing a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so for Membrane, like I still kind of consider it in the design phase.
Yeah.
So there's a series of blog posts that kind of try to cover the design. And so if I'd really love to hear what people think, if they think it's crazy or if they think it's bad or if they think it's good or they have other suggestions. I'm really open to that.
Yeah.
If people want to build desktop or terminal UIs, I'd love to help make that work for you. So if it's I'm on the Clojurian Slack, or if you file an issue, I'm pretty available to kind of help iron out any issues that you might run into. And I'd love to kind of get feedback there. And yeah, I mean, mostly just because there's not a lot of I think a lot of the functional UI programming has been kind of focused on FRP, which is basically like you're building a functional UI library on top of some OO library. And that's where I think why FRP is really pervasive, is because like everybody's building on top of these OO stuff. And so it's like, how do you deal with that? I had trouble finding other things to look at and other references that were kind of like starting lower down in the stack, saying like, what is the interface? What are the primitives? What's the data look like? What's a functional event model look like?
I think Hoplon is meant to be a bit more like that. When we were talking to Misha, he explained it much more like that, but it wasn't cross-platform, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some really, like, I think Swift UI has a lot of really cool ideas. I was recently reading through VRAC, VRAC, and that looks really interesting. And then there's another one. I don't know. There's other interesting stuff that's happening. So
it's more like a sparring kind of discussion that you want to have to think about ideas together. And then, because as you said, I think it's I can see that you're approaching this from first principles, like looking at what UI should be. FRP became a big thing when Elm and other things showed up, and then now we have React and all those things. I think it's completely or at least I understand the point of view that we had this baggage of over-driven frameworks everywhere, and you cannot throw them away completely. So we keep building on top of that one, and nobody was rethinking from the bottom up using functional principles. So I can see a lot of value in that. I think that because then it's going to be functions all the way down. It's like turtles all the way down level. So
Right.
that's really awesome. Yeah.
And I think so Tonsky or Nikita Prokopov recently got funding to build. I think his intention is to build a UI framework, and I
Yeah.
think that's really exciting. And so the other thing that I would say is like if you're interested in building a UI library, um, um, I'm happy to like. I mean, I'm happy to like bounce ideas off of, and um, I want more libraries and I want more options that are kind of like functional up and down. And and I think if you are interested in doing that, like the design space is huge.
Mm.
Like there's a lot of trade-offs that I made that I try to document in the design blog post. But I think there's a lot of other trade-offs that you can make that are, different and kind of unexplored and interesting that I didn't take the time to do. So
Yeah.
if you're interested in, exploring this design space, I'm happy to answer. Like, it's like, oh, why didn't you do that? You can ask me, and I can just tell you, like, oh, I just didn't think of it, or,
Awesome.
Or there's sort of devils in the detail of that one, rather than you thought about it, but you just didn't go that way because of reasons. Whereas, so you want to try and help. Yeah, I guess what you're open to challenges, so maybe to fill out your own kind of like justifications for what you're doing, and maybe it's like changing your mind, perhaps if people give you good enough rationales. But then there's other things which are like maybe you've thought about things that other people haven't thought about because you've been in the space a bit longer, and you could help to educate them about the options as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I think I think on that happy note of people rethinking the UI from bottom up, and
On that bombshell, VJ, come on, it has to be.
well, it has to be a bombshell.
We're rethinking the UI from top to bottom. That's a bombshell.
Yes,
come on.
this is nuclear level stuff. Yes, I agree. It's not even normal bombshell anymore.
So, it's the neutron bomb. Yeah.
Yes. On that one, and obviously all the good ideas come from Emacs, so on that bigger bombshell.
Oh my god, is that still a bombshell?
Yeah, I think so.
It's still blowing my mind that we're getting guests coming on fucking talking about Emacs. Yeah.
It's that I think after
I'm still letting you talk about it as well.
After 7,000 episodes, it's still gonna be Emacs, man. I mean, there's still gonna be Emacs there. It was there before Big Bang. It is gonna be there after heat death of the universe. So, in the beginning, there was Emacs, and then there will be Emacs.
I think it might be the cause of the fucking heat death of the universe.
Well, if it was the cause of the Big Bang, it will be the cause of heat death. That's okay. Anywho, and thanks a lot, Adrian, for joining us and taking us through this journey of UI stuff. And I think, as I said, this is most of the time people are building on the existing things, which kind of limit, or maybe even we get into the narrow idea of what is available, and then not able to make a leap. And I think, as you explained very well, that rethinking it from the ground up might lead us delivering better experiences, better ways to build software, and finally I can stop writing code. And then that's I mean, there's a lot of people praying for me to stop writing code, but
I think you're one of them, aren't you, VJ?
Yes, they're like, please stop writing code now. We can't handle your shit anymore.
Your dog is definitely praying for it.
Yes.
Take me on a walk. Stop that bullshit with the computer.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot, Adrian. Thanks for joining and sharing this. And I'm pretty sure people will think with you. And as you mentioned, there'll be more people think about these fundamental ideas rather than just building, third over third again with object-oriented stuff. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think it's been great. I mean, I think that your challenge to this kind of space is really very timely. Yeah, it's good.
Sweet.
Thank you. And that's it from us. Thank you for listening to this episode of DefN. And the awesome vegetarian music or the track is Melon Hamburger by Pizzeri. And the show's audio is mixed by Wouter Dullert. I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. Maybe you should insert your own name here, Dullert.
Wouter.
If you'd like to support us, please do check out our Patreon page, and you can show your appreciation to all the hard work or the lack of hard work that we're doing. And you can also catch up with either Ray, with me, for some unexplainable reason. You want to interact with us, then do check us out on Slack, Clojurian Slack or Clojureverse, or on Zulip, or just at us at Defen Podcast on Twitter. Enjoy your day and see you in the next episode.